Hey everybody, it's Party Elite, and today we're taking a look at the latest entry in the Stronghold series, Stronghold Warlords. Taking us to the Far East with a multi-part campaign, skirmishes against the AI, and multiplayer action, Stronghold Warlords introduces some new concepts to the series, while easternizing some of the series classics. With the developers giving me an early access key to the game, I was able to dive in and look for what makes the game tick. So, whether you're already familiar with the series, or you're a complete newcomer to the world of Stronghold, here are 5 essentials to Stronghold Warlords. Prioritize layouts. There are a variety of resources that you have to manage in Stronghold Warlords. Most of them are listed here, but there's a crucial resource that isn't listed in any traditional way. Time. Time is a serious and constant consideration in Stronghold Warlords. It takes time for resources to be collected, it takes time for weapons and goods to be manufactured, and it in turn takes time for said weapons and goods to be transported to their respective storage areas. As such, you'll want to make sure your buildings are positioned in a way to minimize travel time between where raw materials are gathered and stored, where they are converted into a finished product, and where said finished product is stored as well. Since recruitment and construction are instant, the time it takes for resources to be delivered can be the difference between plugging a gap in your walls and seeing the enemy charge through it. And there's nothing quite like watching swords get slowly delivered to the armory as you desperately need just 1 or 2 more swordsmen to survive a particular assault. Some resources can only be acquired at specific locations, so you'll want to find the optimal distance between the most important ones and the relevant storage and production buildings to begin planning your layout. Farms can be placed pretty much anywhere, so just make sure the food storage and tea houses are appropriately placed. Weapons and armor manufacturers of various kinds can also be placed pretty much anywhere, so try and keep them close to the stockpiles from which they'll grab the iron and wood and other resources they need, and also try to keep them near the armory where they'll drop off their finished products. Your layout serves an additional purpose as well. One that applies to many real-time strategy games, if not all, but even more so in Stronghold games. Your layout can help funnel enemy soldiers in certain directions, forcing them to make certain decisions, allowing you to maintain an upper hand for longer. This is, after all, partly a game about building a stronghold, walls and all, so using layered walls to create kill boxes, placing stairs at crucial junctions for quick access, and using towers to extend the reach and protection of your ranged units are all important considerations. Remember that walls can be doubled up, or even tripled and quadrupled up, to further increase their thickness and to further increase the time it takes to tear them down. And also remember that when a gatehouse is destroyed, it leaves a massive gap for enemies to pour through. Make your gatehouses the least attractive breach point for your enemy. Force them through walls where their flow might be a bit more contained. Keep in mind that buildings can be placed up against walls to offer extra layers of protection as well, when the walls are taken down. But this also means an increased exposure and an increased chance of that building being destroyed. Buildings can also be placed in a way to create mazes, forcing your opponent to travel around buildings that are easily replaced in order to get to the more important targets inside of a stronghold. It doesn't take too long to destroy some buildings, but every second counts. The same logic applies to walls, should your opponent opt to go over them rather than through them. You can make a maze of your walls, or build endless chicanes, forcing the enemy to take multiple turns and backtrack like they were lining up for a roller coaster ride, all the while your own soldiers can fire away. All this is especially helpful when up against some of the higher quality soldiers who move around more slowly, giving you more time to get your units in position, whether it be on the walls or on the ground. Training troops. Ages, tech levels, and unit upgrades are not a concern in Stronghold Warlords. You either have the equipment, buildings, and population required to produce a unit, or you don't. Some cultures have access to some unique units, and some campaign levels will have restrictions on which units you can or cannot acquire, but as far as access to available units is concerned, you just need the people to recruit, the weapons and gold and potentially horses to arm them, and the right place to train them. This means that if you never want to bother making the cheaper, low-tier axemen, you don't need to build an axe manufacturer. If you want to rush catapults, You can build your siege camp before you build a barracks or armory. If you want to focus on swordsmen, you should prioritize swordsmiths and armorers. If you want... You get the point. Without a tech tree, you're fairly free to approach your military composition how you like, restrained only by how quickly you're able to produce the prerequisite materials. As I touched on earlier, raw materials need to be converted to equipment that needs to be stored in an armory before units that require said equipment can be recruited. In the case of horses, stables are able to hold up to a maximum number of horses, they breed over time, and when you have access to said horses, you're able to make the relevant mounted units as well. You can see exactly what a unit needs when you go to recruit it, and you can plan accordingly. For example, if you want swords and crossbows, you might want to make sure you have twice as many armorers as you have swordsmiths or artilators' workshops. That's because both of these units require armor, but crossbowmen only require crossbows, and swordsmen only require swords, as you may have guessed. Maintaining these ratios ensures that you have access to the units you want when you want it. This is especially important because of Stronghold's instant recruit approach. It takes no time to recruit a unit as long as you have the prerequisites. A click immediately brings them out. This means that you can recruit in response to enemy aggression, recruiting based on the army headed your way, or recruiting as units die and reinforcements need to be brought up. Keep in mind, depending on your layouts and the units you're recruiting, they might be very slow to arrive to where they're needed. Place the recruitment structures in appropriate spots so they're able to respond to evolving circumstances. And make sure to keep your armory well protected. A swordsman cannot exist without a sword, and an archer cannot exist without a bow. Keep that in mind when attacking your opponents as well. Even if you might not win the war in your current assault, can you perhaps destroy their armory or stockpiles? Could you cripple the enemy enough such that they won't be able to respond to a quick follow-up assault? While some RTSs have you prioritizing the recruitment structures themselves, Stronghold makes the equipment stores a juicier target than not, for you and your enemies. It's a popularity contest. One of the key aspects to consider in Stronghold Warlords is your popularity. Affected by a variety of factors, the more popular you are, the faster you'll gain access to new people that will in turn serve as workers or warriors. If your popularity ever turns negative, meanwhile, you'll start seeing your population drop over time, limiting your access to said workers and to reinforcements. Tax rates, food rations, tea rations, and clothes are the basic elements you can adjust to maintain popularity levels, and it's not a bad idea to switch these around to meet your current needs and your ability to stockpile resources. If your population is ever maxed out and you can't afford or be bothered to make more houses, you can let your popularity drop down to make more money or store away the various resources. Then, if you ever need to boost your popularity quickly, to add to your population for example, you can just drop tax rates because you have money stored aside, or you can increase rationing of the various goods because you have those various goods stored aside from earlier when you were kind of providing reduced rations. So again, it's a bit of a balancing act, trying to make sure your popularity stays above 0 at all times. You never want it to go below 0 because why lose population, why cause that damage to your economy? But you want to keep it above 0, but just barely above 0 until you kind of are in an emergency situation and you need to acquire population quickly, at which point you can start making some sacrifices, increasing rations, reducing tax rates, but because you have those stockpiles like I was mentioning, you don't have to worry too much about running out immediately. And then as soon as your emergency situation has been overcome, you can again reset these values and start reducing rations and increasing tax rates again to, again, bring your popularity down just above 0, but also start stockpiling again for the next emergency. Now, as far as more permanent matters are concerned, it's a good idea to build higher quality houses for a more permanent boost to popularity. It might not be enough on its own, but for the minimal extra cost in wood, the boost is worth pursuing. Another thing to take into consideration is fear factor. Using certain buildings, you can either make it very clear to your subjects that you are a benevolent lord, or perhaps you're a tyrant. Depending on which buildings you build, you will see an effect on your popularity, but these buildings do also come with other buffs and debuffs. So keep those in mind if you're planning on sacrificing your popularity or boosting your popularity. It does come at a cost when you're using fear factor. Now make sure you keep an eye on the balance of daily production and consumption of the various resources. You don't want to run out of essentials like rice, since that'll incur a huge negative penalty. And if you're relying on the other resources, you'll want to make sure you're prepared for the case you run out of one. It's easy enough to build the relevant production buildings, but again, it does take time to acquire those resources and make them available for the purpose of calculating popularity. Give yourself enough of a buffer, or you'll soon find yourself in charge of a rather empty stronghold. Conquering and using Warlords. The key differentiator in Stronghold Warlords are the titular Warlords. No matter what game mode you're playing, Warlords of different types will be littered around the map, available for you or your opponents to conquer. Each Warlord falls under a different designation, able to help your cause in different ways. Not only can they provide you with resources, they can also mount attacks against specific targets based on your orders. They can also provide buffs to your warriors and workers, and they can also repair all your walls and do much, much more. Warlords will be defended to a different degree, making them easier or harder to conquer, at least for the first person to do so. And conquering a warlord can be done in a few ways, but the easiest is a matter of attacking them, bringing their health down to 0, and then sending a soldier to stand next to them. Ranged soldiers can fire at a warlord from a safe distance, and though it is slow, it can be a safe way to reduce the target's health down to 0. Warlords have different types of armor. Those wearing robes will quickly have their health reduced by soldiers wielding axes or of a higher tier, while those wearing armor will need to be attacked by swordsmen or higher for best results. Be careful not to attack a warlord with underleveled soldiers. They will get butchered. And even with the right soldiers, you should look to outnumber them in melee. A warlord can take on quite a few at a time. When you do manage to conquer a warlord, any of their defending warriors that were left alive will now fight for you, though you won't be able to give them any orders. These defending soldiers can be used to prevent your enemies from conquering the warlord for themselves, though you'll want to supplement these defenses for particularly important warlords that you can't afford to lose. Sometimes they're your only source of essential resources, or they can extend your reach and access to strategic locations. Now, if you're going to be relying on warlords, make sure to build consulates and embassies to generate the diplomacy points you need to take advantage of conquered warlords. Diplomacy points are also used as an alternative way of conquering warlords. By spending enough diplomacy points, you can sway a warlord over to your side over time. This can take quite a bit of time actually, but it can be used to acquire warlords that might be out of military reach for one reason or another. Make sure you're constantly using your diplomacy points. They have little use outside of these warlord interactions, and they can often make or break a game. There's nothing like finding out you're out of wood, preventing the production of bows, stopping you from recruiting archers. Warlords are just another resource. Use them wisely. Focus fire. I cannot stress this enough, though it might seem a fairly obvious point, it bears mentioning. Whether you are attacking or defending, focus your efforts on specific targets. This is especially true for your ranged units. If allowed to fire and engage at will, your soldiers will pick targets that are most convenient to strike. Perhaps they're closest, or they came into view first, or what have you. This means that sometimes your archers will be firing at heavily armored swordsmen as they waltz over to your walls completely undeterred, when they could have served you much better had they fired at the ladders the swordsmen are now climbing up. This is just one example, but there are many like it. Tell your soldiers who to engage, not only to make sure they're taking care of the priority targets, but also to focus damage and eliminate threats. After all, it doesn't matter if an enemy unit has 1 HP or 100. If it's still standing, it has the potential to cause just as much damage either way. Enemy ranged units are a top priority alongside enemy ladders. Enemy ranged units can take out your own ranged units, and before you know it, the walls belong to the enemy archers, firing down on your troops instead. Meanwhile, enemy ladders will allow their troops to relatively quickly get on top of your walls. If you don't have melee units of your own defending the walls exactly where these ladders arrive, you can expect a massacre. So make sure to destroy these ladders before they're able to get to your walls. They move very quickly, and typically an attacker will outnumber the defenders with the sheer number of ladders they're bringing, because if you're coming in with 100 ladders, all you need is 2 or 3 to make it to the walls. As a defender, you need to make sure they don't. It's a good idea to use towers to get range boosts for your ranged units as well. This will allow them to fire even further than the enemy. This way, you can focus down enemy ladders before needing to focus on enemy ranged units, before then needing to focus down enemy catapults or any other siege engines before finally firing down on their infantry. Keep in mind also that when it comes to firing at enemy targets or being fired upon, unit tiers make a significant difference. As an example, crossbows will outlast auxiliary archers because of their armor, and auxiliary archers can easily kill axemen but will have a much harder time taking out swordsmen, while crossbows find it easy in comparison. Picking the right targets and picking the right attacker for said targets can be the difference between a glorious victory and a shameful defeat. I hope these 5 tips help give you a strong hold on some core elements of the game, highlighting some of the elements that make Stronghold and Warlords specifically stand out. Whether you've played prior games in the series or are a complete newcomer, there is a lot to discover and explore with Stronghold Warlords, and a lot of fun to be had, whether you're playing the single-player campaign, playing against the AI, or playing against your friends. If you have any tips of your own, feel free to share them down below, and if you're looking for folks to play with, don't hesitate to join our Discord, linked in the description down below too. If you're interested in more strategy gaming reviews, previews, let's plays, and more, you might want to consider subscribing as well. That tends to be the primary focus around these parts. As always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big ol' thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.